I did this interview with Taghi, Amirani, and Walter Murch for my video on the documentary Coup 53 and All the President's Men. I definitely recommend checking out Coup 53. You can find a link to the film in the description box below, with a discount for half off for a limited time. You'll also find links to the Coup 53 website and Taghi's social media accounts. The interview is lightly edited for clarity, and I've included time codes below so you can skip around to the different topics we discussed. And thank you to my patrons who, of course, make interviews like this possible. If you'd like to help, head over to patreon.com/Maggie Mae Fish. Enjoy.
Hello, welcome, Walter and Taghi. Thank you so much for joining me. This is such an honor to be chatting with both of you. So yeah, like I said, I have written out questions, but you know, it's loose, and you guys can jump in with each other. But first, Taghi, I'm just going to ask you to do a quick overview of the film, what it means to you, and a quick overview of the process of making this film, just how long it took. And when you decided that this was going to be your All the President's Men film.
Well, I think the All the President's Men comparison happened retrospectively. I didn't set out to make All the President's Men. It evolved. As you see the film, as we discover new things, the film takes on this investigative thriller element. But when it began in 2009, it was never going to be what it is now. It wasn't even going to be a documentary. It was going to be my first foray into a feature narrative fiction film based on the events of the coup. And what it means to me, well, it's the story of my life in some ways. It's what Iranians grow up with. It's deeply embedded in your psyche as the kind of critical, pivotal event in the fate of your country and how it evolved in its relationship with itself and the West, and in particular, America and Britain. Right to this day. So it was inevitable that at some point I'll visit this subject, because I used to hear Mossadegh's name whispered amongst all the members of my family late into the night discussions. So that's the root of it. And I suppose 9/11 made me into a political filmmaker. I wasn't a political filmmaker. I got this urge to go to Afghanistan soon after the invasion in 2001. Just to see how it affected ordinary Afghans, and Iran was just across the border. I could almost reach out and touch Iran. But it was just a matter of time before I went back home to do something that has some significance personally and politically, both for Iranians and the West.
What was it like when you were a kid? What was your experience living in Iran and as a teenager, and how did that change as you grew up?
Well, I grew up for the first 15 years of my life under the rule of the Shah. I only know Iran intimately as a citizen in pre-revolution Iran. And I happened to go to a school where a lot of the teachers were political activists, dissidents against the Shah. They were secretly underground doing whatever it is underground dissidents do against the dictator. And this kind of inevitably spilt into the classroom. Books that were banned by the Shah's regime would be smuggled into the class. It was like, these days students in school might smuggle something else and pass it around, whatever. In those days, it was banned books for us. And also our headmaster, the principal, would come in and say Monday morning and say, your maths teacher, Mr. So-and-so, he's on a break, he's on a holiday. And we knew that was code, that he's been arrested and he's doing time under Savak. So I was unusually aware politically and too early. My mom now tells me, years later, one of the reasons they sent me to England in 1975 was that they worried I was going to become a troublemaker.
Oh, really?
I was going to become a bit of a political liability for the family in those sort of in that atmosphere, because I knew too much, and I could just I would say something, I would do something crazy that would get them into trouble. So that's my awareness of Iran pre-revolution, and it's something that stays with you. It shapes your perspective on your homeland. In fact, when I was in England in 1979, I was still in correspondence with one of my school friends. And we would write to each other, and he would say, "What are you doing over there hanging out with the Brits? Everything is happening here. Finally, there's something happening. You should be back home." And I would feel guilty. I have the letters. I would say, "Yes, but I'm at school." But he would say, "Well, there's stuff happening." And I really did feel that was missing out. I felt I was missing out on a big event in the history of the country. It was a party that I wasn't invited to, and I had bad FOMO at the age of about 18 or 19.
It almost feels like this is a response to that FOMO. It's like a returning and almost like dedicating a large portion of your life to uncovering that part.
Yeah, in fact, I try to recapture some of that. My first ever film in Iran back in 2003 was about a newspaper. It was about the offices of a newspaper. It was following young reporters, reformist reporters. It was actually made for PBS Channel 13 in New York, and for their series Wide Angle. And that was my way of tapping into that atmosphere of school children political activity that I remember, the excitement of it, by going back to that newspaper. And I suddenly found, this feels like how it was when I was a kid. These grown-ups, grown up, they were like in their 20s, reformist journalists, stroke activists, were spoke to me. I felt I was amongst my own people again. And I used that newspaper documentary as a way of getting back.
Yeah, we actually watched that documentary, and it's fantastic. Okay, sweet. I'm going to switch over, and I have a question for you, Walter. So, you're coming in. You're an American. What was your perspective on the Shah, the Iranian Revolution, the U.S. and UK involvement before working with Taghi, and then what was your experience like working with Taghi on such a large project?
Well, I was 10 years old when Coup 53 happened. I was politically aware, not of that, but of the whole McCarthy era in the United States, which embroiled our apartment house in New York, because certain floors were McCarthyites, the next floor were against McCarthy.
Oh my goodness.
It was the first time I was aware that, we're not all in this together, that there are some political things that can divide people. I worked on Sam Mendes's film Jarhead in 2005, which was about the first Gulf War, and doing research for that film, learning up on the history of Middle Eastern oil. That's where I really began to hear about Mossadegh and the history of British involvement in oil in Iran. I mean, for an American, we think of Texas as the beginning of the real oil boom. And that was exactly contemporaneous with Iran. Both countries, so to speak, started gushing oil right around the turn of the 20th century. And because of the British long-term involvement with Iran that goes back centuries, they grabbed hold of it and concocted a deal that was very disadvantageous to the Iranians. Anyway, that's where I learned about it. And I was in New York in 2012 making a film about particle physics, a documentary about particle physics. And I met Taghi at the apartment of the gentleman who was financing both films. And we met each other, introduced ourselves, and Taghi was actually very helpful in getting that film called Particle Fever, about the Higgs boson and all those things, into the Sheffield Documentary Festival, where it won the Audience Award. Taghi graduated in physics from Nottingham University as an undergraduate, and then he hopped over the fence from physics to film and went to film school in Bristol, I think, was it?
Yeah, Bristol.
Yes. So we kept up with each other after that, and Taghi would stay at our house when he came to Silicon Valley to raise money for the film. And a lot of the investors are people from Silicon Valley. And I never thought that I'd work on the film, but you never know what you're going to do in filmmaking. So when I was working on a big Hollywood film, which came to an end, and my wife, Aggie, and Taghi put their heads together and said, Walter's been working on this weird science fiction film. It's time to get back to some facts. And why don't we all go to England, my wife is English, and work on this little documentary for maybe 6 or 8 months. And here we are 6 years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
We're going to start in the summer of 2015, finish by Christmas 2015, get into Sundance by January 2016, and then all will be well. That was the plan. And then Walter and Aggie would go back to California in spring 2016.
Man, that's also because you didn't find out about Darbyshire until 2018. So like the timeline of this entire, movie, it's just like,
yeah.
Well,
the whole concept of the film, the idea was born in 2009. The film was finished, picture locked, and delivered in August 2019. Well, one of the main reasons it took that long was because nobody wanted to fund this film. Everybody and their grandmother and their grandmother's pet rejected our movie and the proposal. Everybody, every single organization, fund, foundation, festival, studio, distributor that normally funds documentaries turned us down, every single one of them. We even had a Hollywood studio come in quite big, really very prestigious, big name and serious funding offer. And then they pulled out mysteriously 3 months into our post-production. So I had to raise the money privately through mainly donations, and as Walter explained, from people in the Bay Area. The Bay Area became my second spiritual home. I flew to San Francisco so often on fundraising trips, the immigration officers all recognized me.
Like, Taghi, come on in.
You again. You're coming begging for money again. Come on in.
It's jumping ahead a little bit, but actually, if you want to talk a little bit about that, because I mean, in a way that feels so disheartening, but also, Taghi, you're so like resilient. I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about the fundraising and being rejected and how that feels, especially with something that this film feels so important, especially as a young person? It's like, thank God this movie was made, but when it's happening and no one wants to fund it, how emotionally, how do you deal with that?
I thrive on no. My entire career has been based on working against negative. Or put very simply, somebody says no to you and say, I'm going to effing show you. It's like, it's proving the people who turned you down wrong is the driving force. It's like, and in fact, the more people rejected me, the stronger the resolve became. And maybe that's the wrong way to drive you. Maybe you need positive energy. I get negative. I turn negative energy and turn it into forward momentum. It was just, I mean, I don't pretend it was all kind of a bed of roses. The rejections were disheartening. They were very upsetting. They kind of, we went through a lot of ups and downs, and when the money ran out the first time, we were shut down for 3 months. And then the next time the money ran out, we had to shut down for 9 months. That's 9 months of no activity.
Yeah.
What we didn't know at the beginning was how this rejection of funding support is actually one of a piece, and is a pattern that's continued to this day. The lack of support for this film at every single stage, is now one uniform piece. It now makes sense. And now we realize we've made something that either scares people, or they don't want to be associated with it, or they're afraid of the truth it tells, or they're afraid of me because I'm an Iranian telling the story. It could be any number of factors. I mean, everyone knows Iran and US is a hot potato, has been for 42 years. That's a given. And I'm willing to, if there's a PhD student with some spare time, I'm willing to fund you for a couple of months research to survey every single documentary about Iran that's made it into international festival circuit, like, Sundance, Toronto, the big ones. Do a survey and tell me what films have actually gone through and been awarded and supported and celebrated. That would be a very good analysis, because I bet you Coup 53 is the very first ever that comes from an Iranian about Iran that's turning the mirror around and saying, okay, there are really bad people doing bad stuff in Iran. Yeah, we know. But let's look back, let's turn this mirror around, and what did we do? How do we fare? Where does it all come from? Walter and I bonded over physics. I'm a cause and effect person. What happened? Force and opposite force equal an opposite reaction. Newton knew it all.
Yeah, I watching this movie, you almost get a sense of like it's the missing puzzle and a thing that just like never made sense, especially as an American, especially with like foreign relations. So many things don't make sense. And then you watch a film like Coup 53 and it fills in so many gaps of your knowledge. And it's like, oh, of course it makes sense because it's exactly that. It's the cause and effect.
Nothing happens in a vacuum. Nothing happens just like,
Yeah. Going off of that, in Coup 53, when Eisenhower took over, it changed the fate of a country forever.
There was a big shift in the temperature in the transition from the Truman administration to the Eisenhower administration. Mm-hmm. Truman and Mossadegh, the prime minister who was deposed by the coup, were good buddies. There was a lot of money flowing from the United States into Iran. Mm. Truman didn't have a very high opinion of British colonialism, and he felt after World War II that there was a worldwide surge, like in India and Pakistan and everywhere, for countries to become their own thing again. And that was what was happening in Iran, because they felt that they were under the thumb of the British petrostate, which basically pulled a lot of strings in the politics of Iran with money and other kinds of influence.
Yeah.
So it's it's a mixed bag, I guess. It's a mixed bag. But when Eisenhower came in, he brought in the Dulles brothers, who had been very active in kind of high-level corporate conservative legal circles, and had been part of the Secret Service during World War II. And they came in and took the CIA, which Truman had created in the late 1940s, as a clearinghouse, kind of a scholarly group of people. And the Dulles brothers weaponized it, turned it into an active secret force that was used to pry loose certain certain governments to move toward the United States' view of things. Because we were fighting in the early 1950s, there was a hot war in Korea where millions of Koreans were dying. And General LeMay was even talking about dropping an atomic bomb. It was not a good thing. And so this idea of using the CIA as a secret force where no Americans would die and countries would suddenly flip their political allegiance was very seductive to Eisenhower, who was the general who presided over D-Day in World War II. He didn't want to repeat that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Taghi, in the documentary you say, Iranians learned that Americans don't actually care about democracy. And as, young American, like Walter said, we can see that in, voter suppression tactic. It's here. They don't care about democracy, in America. And I think you also mentioned that, young Iranians and young Americans have a lot in common. In watching Coup 53, I felt that throughout the documentary.
Yeah, I think once you take the politicians and the power brokers and the corporations out of the equation, people-to-people connections can be harmonious. It's the oldest cliche. People are basically the same. They want the same things for themselves, for their families, for the country. With the Dulles brothers, it's that old thing: follow the money. One of the main reasons they got into this whole thing, they had a personal grudge against Mossadegh in their previous life. Before they became head of the CIA and the Secretary of State, they were involved with this huge corporate deal representing major corporations in America, which was going to get this huge contract from the Shah to rebuild Iran. This was a countrywide contract. And this was going to bring a lot of money and a lot of influence. And Mossadegh nixed it when he became prime minister. And there was basically, they were done out of big cash by Mossadegh. So not only was this geopolitical game between the US and UK and control of oil, this was also a bit of settling scores with Mossadegh personally for the Dulles brothers. Alan Dulles went to Iran to meet with the Shah and survey the scene, do a kind of initial sort of reconnaissance of this potential contract. And in fact, they were representing a bank that also represented the Anglo-Iranian oil company. So this was a kind of a tangled web of money talking to money, which hasn't changed to this very day.
That's true. And there was so much bribing in the film between politicians. It was just like, wow. Yeah, you can learn anything from just looking at where the money came and where the money's going. Walter, I want to stay on politics for just a second. In the movies that you made earlier in your career, they were very much folded into politics. The Conversation, The Two Godfathers, TX, H 1138. There's anti-capitalist, anti-authority themes. Was this conscious on your part, or was this just kind of the how the film industry was at the time, and then how did your politics intersect with what was going on in the 70s when you were creating these projects?
Yeah, I think it was part of the zeitgeist. We were living and working in San Francisco, the whole Haight-Ashbury thing, and we, which is to say the filmmakers at Zoetrope Studios, Francis Coppola, George Lucas, myself, and others, had moved away from Hollywood to make kind of our own personal counterculture films. THX was part of that, Francis's film, The Rain People. And even The Godfather, which was a film that Francis was offered after many, many other famous directors had turned it down for being too cheesy. He turned it into a critique of American capitalism, using the mafia as a kind of a stalking horse for a raw version of how capitalism works. And that got extended in Godfather 2 with the whole story of the mafia being involved in pre-Castro Cuba. So yeah, it was, and The Conversation is sort of about that, about wiretapping, sort of happened all during Watergate. So yeah, the groundwork for all of this was very well laid down by all of those films, and there was a big shift, temperamental shift in Hollywood, let's say, in the 80s, when big corporations started taking over the studios, and there was the Reagan Revolution. It's morning in America, everything's sunny, and enough of this corruption shit. Let's get back to being happy again. So that was a rough sketch of those 2 decades.
Yeah, and I think you can both speak to this, but if there's young filmmakers, especially now, I feel like there's a much more push to put politics into films, to discuss politics in films, to use, the storytelling to look at modern politics. Do you guys have any advice for young filmmakers who, on the one hand, want to be a successful filmmaker, but also want to, use the medium to discuss these important issues? It feels like it's a hard thing to balance and tackle. So if you guys have any advice for filmmakers.
Wow. I would argue start local, find a personal connection to a story that is political, but you personally are linked to it somehow, affects you. And then, and then if that's authentic and if that's true, then it'll appeal to a wider audience and become global. But the only thing I would say, regardless of the subject or the film, make sure you have something that you really personally care about in the story, rather than just see what's flavor of the day and make that into a movie. I think politics is everywhere. We are very highly politicized, good or bad. Whether it's apathy, whether it's too much engagement or the wrong kind of engagement, it's there. It's just a matter of what affects you and what you care about.
Going off of that, when a filmmaker finds the film that's going to be, when you come across and it's like, oh, this is going to be the film that takes up a huge part of my life, a passion, the thing that is the film that, you want to leave people with. And for you, it took so many years. How do you, one, stay motivated? And then also, do you have any advice for filmmakers when they stumble across the thing that they need to make before they die?
Wow, before you die, make sure the film doesn't kill you. Well,
that's not bad.
I think I learned a great deal during the making of this film, I think Godard has said, "You don't make the film makes you." This film certainly made me. I'm not the same Taghi who started Coup 53 in 2009. How to keep going? I think you reach a stage where it's better to finish rather than to stop. If you're swimming across the ocean, at some point during Coup 53, I was closer to the other shore, and it was easier to carry on rather than swim back. And also, when you've got a huge commitment, you've got Walter on board, you've got a team on board, you've got funders who've backed you. It's impossible to give up and back out. You just wouldn't. But then what happened was, as you see in the film, when the investigative search element kicked in, that has its own driving force. We just wanted to know. We really wanted to find out. So it was, time meant nothing, money meant nothing. You just had to, you were driven by the search, and that becomes the overpowering kind of drive. And that's what keeps you going. That, for the last two years of the film, we were driven by the Darbyshire mystery and how that's going to shape the film, how that was going. I mean, we can talk about the structure of the film and how that evolved in a film that's constantly changing. And the golden, the holy grail of the film is discovered, very much at the 11th hour. How do you work with that? I mean, Walter will talk about that better than me. So yeah, that's what kept me going. Plus, I had nothing else to do.
That's true. That is true.
What was I going to do? It's like, there's a movie here. What am I going to do?
Just eat a sandwich. Okay, so, this is a documentary, but it deals very much in truth, but also like a recreation of the truth. There's moments that are recreated with, Ralph Fiennes, but then also like the paintings later on in the film that illustrate the coup. So I was wondering, how do you make sure that you're keeping the truth while also like recreating the truth, while also creating a film to be viewed? There's almost like so many layers. And yet when you walk away from the film, everything felt so heartfelt, and you don't really see the mechanics, even though a lot of the film is basically, showing you guys putting the film together. And there's a lot of behind the scenes within the film that helps. But yeah, I was just wondering, how do you keep the truth intact while using film, which is inherently like an untruthful type of medium?
Yeah, I think I think one of the things that unites both the animation and Ralph Fiennes' performance is that we stay way clear of what's called the uncanny valley, which is something that is so close to being real, but it's not real yet. And as a result, it sounds cinematically, it's like musical dissonance. The notes are almost there, but not quite, and that's where it drives you crazy. So we never pretend that Ralph Fiennes is Norman Darbyshire. In fact, we show the preparations for him sitting down to read basically the transcript of this explosive interview that the real Norman Darbyshire gave, which the tapes of which, and perhaps the film of which, has all mysteriously disappeared into some black hole. And part of the film was trying to find the tapes, or maybe, if we really got lucky, some version of a film with the real Norman Darbyshire in it, but that never happened. And so we went to this sort of secondary stage where we asked a great actor to simply be the channel to get these words from the printed page, the typewritten page of the original transcript, into a film. And so that, the beard that Ralph Fiennes is wearing is the same beard that he was playing Mark Antony in across the river at the National Theater at the same time. I mean, that evening, the evening of shooting with Ralph, he went back and he became Mark Antony and started speaking Shakespeare. With us, he was speaking Darbyshire. Then he went to Shakespeare. So, and it's the same thing applies to a certain extent with the animation. We went specifically for a kind of finger painting, impressionistic look in the animation, so that you never think as an audience, is this really what it actually looked like?
Right,
what we were trying to get as what sort of would invoke the swirl of memories of the person who is telling this story as you watch these images. And so we were very careful to keep a distance between the truth of the matter and how we presented it, either by inviting you backstage to see the preparations for this. You see Ray Fiennes being made up and, you know, ordinary chit chat before the filming. And the same thing applies to the animation.
I was only going to say, there was a shot that you kept in right before the Ray Fiennes interview where he looks directly into camera, you know, breaking the fourth wall. And I watched Coup 53 about 3 times, and it was the third time I caught that I was like keeping that in, did all the things exactly that you said, but I had only noticed it the third time. I was like, whoa, he looks directly into the camera. I
like that look. It's that moment when the cameraman says, it was amazing. It was astonishing what he was saying. And Rafe agrees. And then in that little tiny awkward moment, he turns and looks at me with my iPhone. That was all shot by the iPhone, by the way. Don't underestimate the power of the iPhone. I can talk about that forever for the young filmmakers. Going back to the truth, all the elaborate setup, Rafe, actor, Mark Antony, Shakespeare, Savoy Hotel, the fourth wall being broken and everything. The point is, what he says, that transcript, those are the words. There's no doubt about the fact that Darbyshire said those things. So the foundation of this entire scene, this entire recreation, reenactment, is the truth of what he said. Now we can disagree about why he said what he said. Did he do those things? Is he self-aggrandizing? But that's an authentic record of what he said. So we are just finding a cinematic and a compelling and attractive way of bringing the truth of those words to the audience. But underneath is his words, and that's not in question beyond any shadow of a doubt. The animation, it's based. If all 3 of us go away from this Zoom call and tell a friend about what happened, you, Maggie, will say something different. I will say something different. Walter will say something different. That's already 3 different versions of what happened this evening between us. So the idea that somebody on the night of the 25th of 15th of August, 1953, the first attempt at the coup comes out. The soldier is there, the tanks are there, and that's a pretty nicely animated sequence. The bodyguard says, "I came out, they were there, he gave me a letter." Now, that's his memory of it. That's kind of an impressionistic, emotional memory of it. These are like little flashbacks. But that's how we remember things. We remember little bits. We remember little flashes. We never remember an entire day of our lives. We just remember certain moments. And we're just trying to use that animation to kind of bring the truth of his emotional memory. We're not saying that exactly happened that way. We have 3 soldiers. There might have been 10 soldiers. Does it matter? The event happened, and that's how he remembers it.
Yeah, speaking of like the physicality of it, so like as an actor, you know, you're taught to how to imbue like objects with, you know, meaning and memory. But for you, Taghi, actually holding the transcripts, and when that scene where you first see the filing cabinet of like the CIA's papers, and you say like these physical papers like changed my life forever. What was that like emotionally when, you know, you were sitting down and doing all this research, drowning in stacks of paper, but the papers having such like an emotional meaning to them? I guess if you just want to like bring us into those moments with you, what that was like.
Well, that was a one-take scene. It happened as it happened. Until the very second I said those words, I didn't know I was going to say those words. That really occurred to me. We had been spending about 20 minutes or so going through these papers, and I kind of taking these little disparate bits of information, this line and that line, that title, that confession, you know, that admission, and it was all piling up for me. And suddenly confronted with that moment, which became a pretty critical moment, and Walter will explain what that led to. I just felt it. I thought, wow, if you could sum up the history of the Iranian coup in a bunch of papers, in a filing cabinet, this is it. What happened, what was planned, what was talked about, what was laid down, who said what, and everything, all the plan being signed off, everything is here, and that changed the fate of Iran. And what happened in 53 led to 79, why I'm here, and all that. So it was me, Iran, family, everything, everyone. But incidentally, that's the scene that makes every single Iranian viewer, and I get emails all the time, makes them cry. That shakes them more than anything else. In all my conversations with Iranians, they talk about that scene. They say that we get a lump in our throats when you say that. But that moment led to something interesting that Walter can tell you why the film that moment shaped the film.
Yeah, I mean that moment brought a lump to my throat when I saw it. I had joined the film, and by the time I came on board, Taghi had shot maybe 30 hours of material and collected archives. So there was about 30, 40 hours of stuff. But then he went to Washington, D.C. to interview Malcolm Byrne, who is the head of research at the National Security Archive at George Washington University. And Malcolm is one of the talking heads in the film. His wife is Iranian, and that's his expertise. So the main premise for going to Washington was to interview Malcolm Byrne. But as long as you're there, why not shoot some other things? Oh, well, come into my office, Malcolm says. And so they walk down the hall and go into the office, and Malcolm opens up a drawer. Luckily, it's the middle drawer. It's not the top drawer or the bottom drawer, but it's the middle drawer. And in the middle of the middle drawer is these 250 pages of the CIA's memorandums about the Iran coup. And the camera is filming this, and Taghi realizes, as he just told you, what he's looking at, that's it. And it's such an authentic moment where you see that expression on his face that when I saw that, and Taghi came back to London, I said, you've got to be in the movie because of the authenticity of that moment. That dovetails with one of the problems of making a film like this, which is that there are many different vested interests who have very different stories about what happened in 1953. And if we had attempted to make let's say a kind of a God's eye view, this happened, this happened, this happened, the immediate question would be, who are you and why are you telling us these things? Where are you coming from? And so by pushing Taghi from behind the camera into the front of the camera, that's who's doing it. And Taghi has his own particular personal history, which is that he is a dual British-Iranian citizen. He was born in Iran, spent up to his teenage years in Iran under the Shah, and then came to Britain to study, go to university. And so he knows both cultures. And this film would not have been possible if that hadn't have happened. If he was a British filmmaker, he couldn't have done certain things that only an Iranian can do. And by the same token, if he was only Iranian, he couldn't have gotten certain things that only a British person could get. So that it all ties itself together. But the fact that Taghi is in the film on camera, it really stems from that moment.
Yeah, I think Taghi said this possibly in another interview, but about the film finding you and not like you chasing the film. Like that sequence of events is such a perfect illustration of that, because it's like because of all these things that happened, you ended up being in that room with that stack of paper, which it's kind of this process of filmmaking. Not setting out to do that, but that happening. It feels so like visceral.
That's obviously a lot to do with the nature of the story we were telling once I was in it. And then we were involved in this investigative thing, finding things. I became the character in search of documents and witnesses and material. But also it goes back to all my previous filmmaking experience that I don't like to plan too much. I like to fly by the seat of my pants. I like the nervousness and the uncertainty and the excitement of not knowing what's going to happen next. So I feel the energy comes from not knowing and having to capture that as you're filming. Most of my other films have been made that way. I mean, none of them have matched the level of discovery and live on-air discovery as Coup 53, but they all have this degree of spontaneity of let's see what happens, have some faith and take a leap, which I think it's quite a thrill.
We're going to talk a little bit about All the President's Men. And I know Taghi said that it was kind of more like a retrospective, that afterwards it was like, oh yeah, like that film. But I was wondering during the process, what films did you guys discuss? And then also afterwards, what are the similarities between these films, Taghi, that you watched growing up as a young person interested in filmmaking? How did that find its way into Coup 53?
I think you're aware of films you've seen, but you'd be surprised that Walter and Walter will talk about this because I know he's talked about in his master classes that when he's cutting a film, he doesn't watch movies. I don't think Walter and I discussed movies as templates for what we were doing. It wasn't like, oh, they did that, so maybe we should do this. That never happened. We were obviously subconsciously aware of all the films we've seen, and I was aware of All the President's Men, and that only occurred to me when I started looking for papers, and I felt I was searching in something that somebody doesn't want me to know. There's this hidden thing that I'm trying to unearth, and that informed my thinking a little bit during the filming. In fact, my homage to All the President's Men, I didn't have the same budget as Gordon Willis when they go to the Library of Congress, that amazing crane shot when Robert Redford was sitting there. They're going through all the library cards, they're going through everything, and the camera just goes up and up and up and up and up right to and it's an amazing shot. Well, I stuck my iPhone on a stick and put it on the top of my office as I was going through those boxes, and that's my version of the crane shot. I was aware of it, but it wasn't like without wanting to brag, but are we going to brag? I think Walter and I have done something so different, so weird, and so unusual in Coup 53 that I don't think there is a template for it. I think the movie has turned out to be smarter than us. We've pushed boundaries that we didn't think we were going to push, including the meta layers within meta layers, not just the fourth wall. We cut a scene, and we put that cut scene in the film and we show it to somebody, and the audience just sees something they've seen, but in the context of the cutting room. Or we have this wonderful thing that Walter came up with, which is brilliant, the phantom flashback. We have a flashback to a scene in the film that hasn't been in the film, but you think they're just referring to something that I haven't seen, but I feel like I've seen it. So, but yeah, that's the end of my bit. Walter will speak much more eloquently about how other films inform your work, but they don't directly. I don't know.
No, I would just second everything that Taghi just said, that we were mainly trying to solve problems, that there would be problems. Either we didn't have access to something, or we thought we did and then it was taken away, or we can't find it, or how are we going to solve this problem? So that they were all, the techniques in the film are various ways of solving these problems. There's a great quote from Jean Cocteau, the original director of Beauty and the Beast back in the 1940s. And he said, style is a way of telling complicated things simply. And that's sort of what's happening, is that it's a very complicated story. I mean, I would get moments where I was thinking, what are we taking on here? Because basically it's 100 years of Iranian history. I don't speak Iranian, but you simply put your head down and start to begin to tie things together and come up with a problem, find a way around it. And that gives you another idea about how something can be solved. I mean, the film plays sort of in a playful way with the different aspect ratios of formats.
Yeah.
So this is essentially a 2-to-1 frame. It's twice as wide as it is high, but within that frame, we're dealing with the 1:3 aspect ratio of the way things were shot, and many other formats. DV comes into it, digital video, early digital video. Super 8 comes into it. 16 millimeter comes into it. When you watch the film, you'll see that there isn't just a frame in which things happen. The frame is bouncing around, and it's not just doing it chaotically. We're doing it on purpose to emphasize certain things. For instance, a lot of the old footage that was shot with interviews in the mid-1980s of people in Britain who were still very much alive, who'd participated in the coup, was shot for a TV format. But we would position that frame depending on which way the person was looking, so that if somebody was looking right to left, we'd put it over here, and then left to right, it would be over here. And so it implies that they're kind of talking to each other, and in a way they are, because that's how we structured the film, as a series of each person posing a question that somebody else answers. So it was a lot of fun doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's so many sequences that it almost feels like a choir of people adding their voice to a story, which, as a viewer is so beautiful. As an editor, it was just like, I don't even know where you would start. But also, with there was a particular interview where the interviewee may or may not be telling the truth, and the camera kind of not wanders, but almost draws your eye away as he's fumbling the truth, which I felt subconsciously as I was watching it.
This must be Darbyshire Zahedi.
Yeah, yes.
That's the Shah's ambassador. He's the son of the general who was the coup plotter and replaced him. Yeah, we had this toolbox of everything that we could get our hands on in filmmaking devices. Some we even invented, I suppose. We tried everything, and as Walter said, all the flourishes, whether substantial structural devices or whether little visual nice touches, they were all problem solving. It was like, oh, we can't do this. How do we solve this? Let's do this. And right down to I highlight the text in the transcript on an orange Sharpie. And then so Walter takes that, and so when there are moments to highlight the significance of certain unseen material, he puts a digital Sharpie next to it in orange. So that kind of, there's this uniformity of style and graphic devices. I watched the film, and now here's the thing, and I'm sure Walter has put in so many other little things, little kind of cuts and morphs and sound things, and that I don't even know. I'm sure I don't know, and he's never going to tell me. It's like what's that line? Editing is like performing a card trick in front of an audience. What's that card trick? Quote?
It's performing a card trick without letting people know what you're doing.
That's right. Yeah, but not distorting the truth, mind. It's
right.
Yeah.
I have a couple editing questions for you, Walter. One of them being, speaking earlier of Taghi, physically holding the transcripts, but also editing used to be very physical, a lot, physically cutting. But now that everything's digital, in your opinion, what's been lost and what's been gained, as technology progresses in regards to editing?
Almost nothing has been lost that can't be recovered in some way. I mean, that's maybe 20 years ago, there was a very live debate about analog versus digital, and people took very hard positions. I'll never do this. I'll do this. I'm going to jump in the pool no matter what. Now, basically, with a few holdouts, Christopher Nolan and some others still shoot on film, but nobody edits on film anymore. It's just, you can't do it. because the equipment is all falling apart. Even if you could find it, you can't find people who really know how to maintain it. So it's everything is digital in the editing. And I jumped in the pool pretty firmly back on English Patient. That was the first film I edited digitally, and that was 25 years ago now. So that's half of my life has been spent editing digitally, and the first half on film. So I'm happy that I had the experience of working on film, because there's a lot of arcane stuff that I'm happy that I had experience of. But basically, you can't stop the tsunami once it hits, and we're under a digital tsunami now.
That's true. This is a question. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but did psychedelics have any impact in your artistic process?
No.
Back in the 70s, sometimes as, like a young film nerd, you're watching, old films from back in the day, and you're like, oh, I feel like a lot of these were influenced by.
That stuff was going on, but I never did it because there was just so much stuff to do. And, it's down to your personality. And that's, I found my drug in the material itself.
Jumping off of that, kind of, Walter, I have to ask if you know that there's been a resurgence of love for Return to Oz. I don't know.
Oh, good.
Yes, especially people of a younger my generation love Return to Oz, even more so than the original. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that. A lot of the questions we got were about, asking you about that film. So,
yeah, well, the books on which that film is based were a huge part of my growing up. My mother had read those books when she was a child, the Oz books. And so when I was ready to hear that stuff, she would read them to me. And I think Ozma of Oz was the first grown-up book that I actually sat down to read myself without, Mom, don't help me. I'm going to do it myself. So the imaginative life of those books is deeply, deeply encoded in me, and probably in ways that I'm not even aware of. So the opportunity came to make that film, and I thought, well, I'm going to make it the way the books are, rather than the way the 1939 film is, because it's kind of a vaudevillian aspect. And the author of those books himself, L. Frank Baum, was both of those things. He loved vaudeville. And when the first book was a big success, the first thing he did with the money was put on a Broadway show of The Wizard of Oz. And that's what the 1939 film tapped into. But I was, for temperamental reasons, taken with the imagery and the kind of creepy stuff that goes on in the books. And that was what I was trying to do. And also put it in the period in which these things happened. And, I'm still slightly amazed at how much people say this film is such a really frightening film, Return to Oz, because there's no blood, nobody ever touches anybody with an intent to harm them. There are things that happen, but I think it's because it's treading on a film. It's launching another planet into the solar system, of which there was only the Wizard of Oz, and now suddenly there's this other kind of strange planet, and what is this? And that affects how people react to the film, because the Wizard of Oz is more than just a film. It's partly how Americans define themselves. It's a touchstone for all kinds of one-liners and metaphoric behavior. And the idea that another film would come along and produce an alternate version of this, that itself is threatening. And then, of course, you get into some of the weird things that happen in the Oz books that are weirder than whatever you ever saw in the first film. So,
I do want to ask, Taghi, what, in your opinion, why do you think the British don't want to admit their involvement, even at this point where it's beyond obvious, I guess? Like, what's your opinion on that?
That's the $64 million question, because it's an absurdly open secret. Everybody knows. They have tried several times to suppress the information coming out. It happened, in fact, when the State Department has this report called the Foreign Relations of the United States. It comes out of the History Department of the State Department. It's the Frost report. And back in the late 80s, they were going to put out the edition relating to 1953-54, in which the role of the British was going to be pretty much there in memos and correspondence and telegrams, and it was going to be revealed. And word got out in the diplomatic circles to the Brits that the Americans were going to do it, and they clamped down. They suppressed that part. They got them to redact all the bits about the British. In fact, they did this thing, which is not only they did it, they also stopped people talking about the fact that they've done it. It's only recently that we know. And that report finally came out in 2017 during our it at one stage, its publication was part of our film. It was in our 8-hour assembly at some point. In fact, it was 1,007 pages, and I printed every single page. And it was a beautiful scene at the printer's shop, fast printing. It reminded me of the typewriter at the beginning of All the President's Men. It was like, bang, 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 bang. It was quite a powerful scene. It was a fun moment. So the British haven't, to this day, admitted officially to their part in this coup. And by official, I mean the British state, the foreign minister, the Secretary of State or the Prime Minister has not stood up in Parliament and say, yeah, we did this. We were involved. This was our idea. And if there's one critical thing that Coup 53 does, it kind of clearly makes it obvious in the film that this was a British project. This was a British idea. This was driven by the Brits. They brought in the Americans. They ruined your people. You could have been innocent, nice Americans, good democracy for all. And they pulled you in. They pressed the right buttons. Although the whole communist button was also a fake story, because the Americans were really not, there was no risk of Iran becoming communist. We have documents that show the Americans were negotiating with the Brits about split of the oil before they agreed to help them with the coup. So this was even for the Americans, this was about oil. Why are they not doing it? I mean, in a way, I think our problems with the film being derailed, the attempts to kill the film off since last summer's release, the 4-month legal battle. I'm not saying the British government was involved, but boy, they did agree to help their cause. They really did help their cause. In a different planet, these guys were working for them or doing God's work for them. I don't know. Hopefully, one day they'll come clean. I think it's to do with money. I think it's to do with money.
That's again, to follow the money. That's probably where to go.
Always follow the money.
I was going to ask, so what has been the reception of Coup 53 in Iran, and especially for like younger Iranians? If you want to talk a little bit about that.
It's been overwhelming. I didn't even think this film was ever going to get screened in Iran. And in Iran, you have to have a permit for public screening. To get into a theater, you have to have a government. And it got that, and it's uncut. It got into a festival, and the reception from the festival, it won the audience prize. That's always a good thing when the audience responds. And then it went on to the second festival, which is the national festival. It's Iran's answer to the Oscars or Cannes. It's the biggest festival. It's in its 39th year. And it won the prize. It won the best documentary. And my inbox, my social media is still buzzing. It still buzzes every day with young Iranians who were born after the revolution. Who most of them don't even know who Mossadegh was, are almost tearful in telling me, thank you for telling us our own history. Now we understand. Now we get it. Now we understand. So that's been very kind of heartwarming and gratifying. In some ways, that reaction means a lot more to me than any other reaction, because ultimately I made this film for Iranians as well, not just for the West who don't know the story. In terms of content and ideas, it hits the West. Emotionally, it hits the Iranians in the right place. It kind of is a cathartic experience for them.
Cool. Okay. I have one question for both of you. We're kind of wrapping up here. But you guys have a lot of experience in filmmaking, and we all love film. We believe in the power of film and how it can change history and it can change people's minds. It can change people. Do you still believe that, or has that ever been disillusioned for you of filmmaking being a powerful medium to affect real world change?
Yeah, it is the powerful medium because it can talk simultaneously to the three main areas of the human brain: our instincts, our emotions, and our sense of logic. And no other art form can really do that with the effectiveness that film does, because film is not just a language, it's a meta language. It's a language of languages. So it can involve the language of music, the language of words, of text, the language of images, the language of sounds themselves, and then all the other languages of costume and acting and makeup and whatever. So it's this overarching thing that has the power to, in an organized way, and this is the difficulty, to talk to each of those, essences of what it means to be human, the instinctual, the emotional, and the logical. You can focus on all of them simultaneously and speak to them in a way that is just compelling. It's I like to say that a mother comforting a frightened child says that, don't worry, dear, it's only a dream or it's only a movie. You don't say, don't worry, it's only a painting, or don't worry, it's only a sculpture. I mean, these are art forms and they can have an influence, but they're not the overwhelming influence that dreams and films are. And of course, Hollywood is the dream factory, so you can get into a whole thing of that. But having said all of that, film is particularly good at getting an idea into the cultural bloodstream at the right moment. And that's the trick. That's the difficult thing. Getting an idea, making the injection. Film is not so good at that because it's a mass medium. It can do it, but it's really good at taking an idea that is ready to be absorbed by the whole culture and making that happen because of this whole thing that I just talked about the three levels. So that's, but it is without question so far the most dominant art form that we have in terms of influencing people.
I agree. I think at its best in its storytelling, our brains are wired for storytelling. That's how we respond. Everything we do. I mean, stories kind of touch us deeply. I think you can measure the power of a film by people trying to kill it off. In my personal experience, if Coup 53 had no value, had no impact, posed no threat, people will not be trying to kill it off. And Walter said, when it hits the zeitgeist, when it hits the right moment in our culture and in our politics, it can be very powerful. No single film can change anything, but it can become part of a conversation that leads to something potentially changing. I was amazed how Coup 53 tapped into the Black Lives Matter and the anti-colonial, anti-imperialist sentiment here in the UK, with the statues of slave traders being pulled down, because the film obviously is about British imperial hubris and looting in Iran. it connected to that. Then I was amazed that our promotional clips resonated so powerfully in India. I made a 1 minute clip of the film where we talk about Churchill and his kind of gleeful pleasure of discovering Iranian oil as the prize from the land of dreams, from fairy tale. You know, prize from the fairy. What was the exact sentence? It'll come back to me. It's in the film.
Yeah, it was like the prize of a fairyland. Yeah.
It's the greatest prize from the land of fairies or whatever. Well, of course, the Indians don't love Churchill. Hello. And so that clip, I deliberately made that clip and I posted it on Facebook and I promoted it to India only. Within 2 days, it had 1.5 million views. So there you go. You've touched an entire continent of a subject which is about you and your country, and it resonated. The same with South America, the same with Chile, because, you know, Kissinger, 1973, Pinochet, Allende. So this is a film, is particular, but it's global. What it says is global, and it's tapping into something that's very important right now. And that's what I was saying to the young filmmaker. Make something that's very relevant to you personally and locally. And if you do it right, and if it's authentic, it will resonate, you know, beyond your borders. Coup 53 is a dangerous film, and that's a good thing.
I love that. That's such a great sentiment. When you watch it, it feels dangerous, but like in a good way, you know. It will, and the way it was edited, we're along the ride with you, Taghi. Like as you go through the film, it really does feel like you're in the room with you at all times. Especially the late night shots of you going through the paper. I like felt it in my bones. I felt tired.
Yeah, that was about 1:30 a.m. In November 2016, I think. 2016. Apart from the animation and apart from Rafe, everything you see in the film is happening as it's happening. We didn't stage things, we didn't redo things, we didn't, everything is there and then. When I find that newspaper article from 1985 on the newspaper archive website, Observer article, and I'm going through it and I was going to scrolling through the screen, I find it, and I literally grab this and I run and I print it out and I run into Walter's office. That's as it happened. That really is what happened was at that moment. Because for me, I wanted to see Walter's reaction, so it's scrappy, it's wobbly scope, it's jittery, but people loved at it because it's the real thing. It's as it happens, and I'm glad it goes back. If it's authentic and people feel you're there for real, doing the thing for real, they'll follow you. They feel they're with you, and they enjoy the ride.
Twitter questions. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so this is for you, Taghi. This is from Cameron Rice. In the documentary, there's an elastic truth. There's the truth of the situation and an emotional truth. Going into a project, how do you thread that needle? We talked a little bit about it, but...
Yeah, we did. I don't think in concepts when I'm going into a project. I don't theorize. I don't say that there's this and there's that. I'm like very much jump in and confront the story and do what you do, find out what you find, try to find a way to shape the story. And I'm not an over analytical person to come up with there's this truth and there's that truth. It's basically ultimately, as long as you are loyal and faithful to the actual spirit of the truth of what you're doing, you're not pulling the wool over the eyes of the audience, you're not distorting things. You use filmmaking technique and all the tools in the box. I've never been a thinking filmmaker. I'm a feeling filmmaker. My brother is a thinking filmmaker. Walter is both a thinking and a feeling filmmaker, which is bang.
We did have another question for you, Taghi, specifically about Hollywood and its somewhat abysmal history of depicting, Middle Eastern conflicts and people in the Middle East. And, as someone from the Middle East who loves film, like, do you have any feelings about that, especially just like with Hollywood's history of...
Yeah, I think there's a guy somewhere in Hollywood sitting in an office who's the gatekeeper who decides what films about the Middle East are made and what are not. That's my conspiracy theory. I'm done with, because 99% of films about Middle East, about Iran, about that part of the world, about, the brown people, for want of a better word, come from the same stable of thinking. They come from the same template. I think we talked about this earlier. Let's do a scientific academic research on the films about Iran in the last 42 years that have been big hits at festivals. Let's just do the Sundance for the sake of argument. I'll be very curious to know what those films are and what they're doing. Now, this is not to disparage those films. They're great movies made, and they speak to their time, they speak to the experience of the filmmakers, and they tell the story as they say it. Although there's a discussion to be had about what do filmmakers do when they find out that festival only wants that kind of film. So who are the tastemakers? Where is the unconscious bias? What signals are you being given? You make this kind of film, we'll let you in. You make that kind of film, sorry. So I've given up on Hollywood and its treatment of the Middle East, or let's say Iran specifically. We've all seen 300 and many other films, Not Without My Daughter. This is where we talk about films being a political tool. They play they're a tool in the political game. So they're not just entertainment. There's an agenda, and they fulfill an agenda. I'm sure the American mindset has been shaped by how Hollywood sees Iran, period. And Hollywood sees Iran in one way. And that shapes the public opinion.
Yeah. I think if you looked at the history of Hollywood films starting in, 1910 up until probably 1950, 60, maybe 70, and look at the cowboy Indian kind of films. Who are the Indians? They play very much the same role that the Middle East is playing now, which is they're strange people with strange headgear who have these weird passions, and they're very dangerous, and we have to kill them or outwit them or do something. That phrase, the cavalry is coming, is very indicative of, what the threat was, which is somebody's about to be scalped by an Indian, by an American, a Native American, who are being pushed off their lands by the white people. But the white people are making these films that demonize the very people that they were oppressing. And so I think there was a shift, certainly that accelerated after 1979 with the Middle East. The Middle Eastern bogeyman took over, where the threat of the Native American had formerly played a part in Hollywood.
That's so insightful. Yeah, the cowboys and Indians metaphor. Hollywood, I'm so in love with it. They just use it forever and keep refilling whoever they need to be the other.
Yeah, all those extras who were playing Indians falling off horses, bang, 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 are now replaced by angry bearded Muslims who are just bang, bang, bang. My good friend, who's a brilliant stand-up comic and actor, Maz Jobrani, who's actually in LA, he's got a whole bunch of material he does as part of his stand-up routine about auditions for Muslim actors in Hollywood movies. It's like, he tells his dad, "I've got an audition, and what are you going to do? You're going to play a doctor? You're going to play an engineer?" "No, I'm playing a terrorist." So my name is Mohammed. Don't shoot. On a sinister level, we need that mind control, so to speak, to then justify invading Iraq and people saying, "Yeah, let's go for it." I mean, we need that in order for our foreign policy to look like a sane foreign policy. We've got to go out there and get those baddies.
Well, actually, that leads for Taghi. What do you hope the future entails for, both Iran, but also, American and UK and Iranian foreign policy? What do you hope to see in the future?
I hope that we'll all see Coup 53 and then hug each other.
That's beautiful. Actually, I also hope that.
I'm an optimist. I think maybe things don't look great in the short term. I believe in the ultimate goodness of the people. Another cliche, I really do believe in the power of the people. If enough voices, enough people. I think if more people are better informed, then they can have some influence over the politicians. I was blown away in our festival tour over a year, right across America and Europe, of how many people came and said, I had no idea. My God. And when they see the film, and it's like that's changing one heart and one mind at a time. So we tried very hard. Before COVID, we were very close to having the film screened on the Hill, at the Congress, because we wanted the American politicians to see it. And one day I'd like to screen it at the Parliament here. Again, we were trying to get it screened at the House of Lords. Because I think most of these warmongers, these politicians who want to invade everywhere tomorrow, haven't read history. I don't think they know history. I think their ground zero, forgive the pun, that their reference point for Iran and US is the 79 revolution and the hostage crisis. It's like there was no Iran before that. There was no Shah. There was no CIA. There was no coup. There was no 1953. It's like that's where things started. It goes back to cause and effect and the backstory.
Oh, we do have one more question for you, Walter, from my friend Noah, who is an editor here in LA. He asked, can you feel the difference in the way films are edited for the small screen or streaming versus, for a large theatrical release? They've been in quarantine all year editing for streaming, so I think they had it on their mind.
Back in the 40s, the only place you could really see a motion picture was in a movie theater or maybe in your classroom for an educational film. Since then, obviously television, but now everywhere, we're just saturated with images. You go into a department store and there are all kinds of screens selling stuff. And, you carry the thing around in your pocket, the phone, and you stop to pump gas and there's something beaming at you. So there's all these different formats. Luckily, there is some kind of law that says what works on the big screen will also work on the small screen, but not necessarily the other way around. For instance, to edit something for a department store, you have to kind of create lots of movement, sort of like as if it's a shrieking parrot on a branch to attract somebody's attention. So as much shaky camera and as much quick jump cutting as possible, that makes it effective because you're in a department store, maybe post-COVID, and they're trying to attract your eye to look at something. And there's lots of other things trying to attract your eye. So that style of editing is appropriate for that environment. Let's call it the shrieking parrot style of editing. Shrieking parrot is very bad in a dark movie theater. You would simply blow people's brains apart if a feature film was edited that way. So as I said, luckily, you can watch Lawrence of Arabia on an iPhone. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do it, and you can get some enjoyment out of it. But it doesn't work the other way around. I haven't been studying the developments over the last year of COVID. I've been busy, working with Taghi on this, promoting this film, and I'm writing a new book on film, and various other things. So I can't say how editing has changed over the last year or so of COVIDiana.
Oh, great.
The other thing that didn't come up is that in the absence of any support from the industry at every level, we are self-distributing this film because we are not to be beaten. They didn't want to distribute our film, but we're doing it ourselves. So we rely on word of mouth, and we rely on people telling everybody where to watch the film. And we'd love people to go visit coup53.com to find a screening near them. So that's a big help for us.
I would love that too. If everyone watching this video could just go into the description below, click on the link. We'll have it there for everyone to see the film. So
because of the problems we had, everything that happened since the release of the film last summer, and the legal shenanigans and the attempts to derail our film and kill it off and then its comeback, I filmed all of that as the way we did Coup 53 itself.
Wow.
So we are working on a sequel about the sinister shenanigans that went on from August 2020 till December 2021. And that's going to be a half-hour follow-up about everything that happened afterwards and how we got through it, which is just as crazy and as surreal and revealing as the film itself. And we've called it Coup 53.1.
I'm looking forward to that. Wow.
So anyone who watches the film and follows our social media will get word of that film at some point soon. And there's a bigger political campaign on the back of the film. I haven't quite worked it out, but we can talk about that later when it comes nearer the time. It goes back to the British.
As a lot of things do. My ancestors are Irish, so when I was watching this, I was like, yeah, you dirty Brits.
Well, yeah, Evie Franks, Walter's associate editor on the film, was amazing. She's Irish. So we're a very international team, by the way.
Yeah, I can't talk enough about the film, as evident from me doing a video on it, but it truly, I know you know, but I do hope you know how emotionally impactful it is. And it's so fun, or it's so interesting to hear, people say how thank you for telling us our history, but also as like a young American, thank you also for telling us our history. Because it's so relevant to everything that's happening today. And like Taghi said, you can't understand what's happened now if you don't look back in the past to how we got here. So
I mean, the news today is that the Biden administration and the Iranians are beginning to talk about rekindling the agreement that Trump had scuttled. So,
oh man, I
hopefully they will have all seen Coup 53, so they will know what's in the heads of the people who are sitting on the other side of the table from them.
I'd like to think it's because they saw Coup 53 that they're coming back to the table.
Listen, we just saw this wonderful film, but let's have a chat.
Harry Truman said, "There is nothing new in the world except a history you do not know."